Welcome to the next frontier where imagination, innovation, technology, and new ideas come together to radically revolutionize your quality of life and to change the world around us for the better. All right, so I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you today, Marianne Williamson.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled too. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like, I know it could have been so easy for you to do this over the phone, but you made the effort to come in and be here with us. And you're an icon in the field. So for anybody anybody that doesn't know, Marianne Williamson, you've written 11 books now. 4 of them were #1 bestsellers. But you've run for Congress. Yeah. I know we were just talking before, and a lot of what you did, a lot of your core message has come from A Course in Miracles. But you were mentioning, because I know you speak all over the world and you have all sorts of different audiences that you'll speak to. You've got charitable efforts that you do. There's so much there. There's just this wealth of wisdom sitting in front of me.
Thank
so I'm
you.
blessed. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as you're here today, in our show, The Next Frontier, what we look at is how the world is changing and how it can never be the same again as a result of some of these changes. And I know you're a thought leader. You've met with presidents, haven't you? Didn't you meet with President Clinton?
Clinton, yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that? Or can you not?
Well, I think every American feels related to the White House. I had an interesting experience. Many years ago, I had been speaking on the telephone with the president about things that were going on.
As you do, right?
As I do.
Yeah.
As I do. But interestingly enough, I don't know if you remember, I don't want to say the name, but there was a mass murderer that everybody knew about. And I'd been told that his mother had read my books, and would I be willing to speak to her? Obviously, she was deeply suffering at that time.
Sure.
And I had an experience where I had spoken to the president, and then I got off the phone, and about an hour later, I got a phone call. Someone had asked me, could she call you? And I said yes. And about an hour later, I talked to that woman. And I thought to myself, first of all, what are the chances of this happening? And secondly, what is the message here? And I felt in my heart that in God's eyes, people are people. And you go from someone who is literally the most powerful person in the world to someone who at that moment would be considered certainly living in the depths. But despair is despair, and people are people, and that's been a great privilege in my work. It's kind of like when you go to an AA meeting or something like that, where the mogul is next to the person living on the street, and they say at an AA meeting, you're just another drunk when you're in here. And I think that the privilege of my career has been that the level of conversation that is most real and most authentic, and that we all really yearn to have, has nothing to do with the externals. It has nothing to do with socioeconomics. It has nothing to do with what people are experiencing on the outside. And when you were talking before about how the world is changing, what changes is the external. But I think the way to navigate the external is to be so grounded in the internal and in your internal powers and your internal security. In biblical terms, even, in the New Testament, when Jesus says you can live your house on, you can build your house on sand, or you can build your house on rock. And I think too many times what happens in our world is we build our house on sand, whether or not people like us, whether or not we have the money today, whether or not the prestige and the opinions of the world and the money, it all goes up and down, and we're all emotionally and psychologically at the effect of that craziness. And, you have your ups and downs, I'm sure, with the work that you do. Sometimes you're in the money, sometimes you're not. Sometimes they like you, sometimes you're not. But the people who have a difficulty navigating change, and the world is changing. I mean, one thing's clear is that the world is changing. The people, I believe, who have the most trouble navigating change on the outside are people who are not grounded in the changeless. And that's what the spiritual life, personal growth gives us, is a grounding emotionally and psychologically in that which does not change. And when you have that, you have the power. That's a counterintuitive nature. You have more power, I believe, in the world that does change when you are grounded psychologically and emotionally in that which does not change.
Sure. And I would think that if you don't have that groundedness, that's when people end up having their midlife crises, or they end up getting out further in life and realize they've got a
Right.
hole in their soul because they never realized who they were in relationship to other people. That's kind of the classic A-type personality.
Yeah,
push,
but
push.
you know, it's interesting. I think we should, this whole notion of a quote unquote midlife crisis, I think we should call it a midlife growth spurt.
Yeah.
I think that, and in fact, in this book, Age of Miracles, I talk about midlife as a second puberty. You know, in the first puberty, your body changes, your whole persona changes, and the child goes to adolescent, and it's a huge mark. It's a huge change that when societies and communities are healthy, they mark for the child through a coming of age ceremony, bar mitzvahs, and things like that. And what you see in young people, of course, is when the society or the community does not mark it adequately and respectfully, the child will do it themselves. Drugs, sex, all kinds of things that might not be so functional. But I think that with midlife, something very similar happens. The persona of the young person, who you are as a young adult, is different than who you are in your 50s. Different than, you know, around 45, then at 50, something changes. And I think that we call it a crisis. We don't call puberty, I mean, on a certain level, puberty is a
Right.
crisis.
I
But we
think for me
also
it was.
understand. So the midlife crisis is no more or less a crisis than puberty is. And I think it's a second. And I think that as we begin to contextualize it differently, we begin to experience it differently and without such almost shame and humiliation of, you know, oh, you're going through your midlife crisis.
I have to ask you, do you know Jeremiah Abrams?
No.
I was training with him in Bali, and I know he did a lot of work with Debbie Ford, and I
Who
saw
was
what,
a dear friend.
yeah, and I saw what you guys did with the shadow effect,
Yes,
which was really
and Deepak,
neat.
yeah.
Yeah. When you think of going through, he had actually said, okay, midlife correction.
Right.
Yeah, which
Course
which I really
correction
like.
all through life.
Yeah. And where do you think, is there a combination, or where do those two concepts collide? The midlife correction and perhaps the shadow, as Jung would say. Is there a correlation, or where do those things come together?
Well, all that a crisis is, and all that a correction is when you recognize that there is in any moment or in any situation or circumstance a gap between that which you most truly are, the love in you, the elegance in you, the style in you, the impeccability in you, and the integrity in you, versus some wound, usually from childhood, and you're acting out of that. You haven't processed that. You haven't healed that. You're triggered. So in one moment, you're everything you wish you could be, and in another moment, oh, wow, was I dumb? Was I unwise? Was I self-sabotaging? I didn't play that one very well. And life, you know, that kind of course correction should be made every day of our lives. I remember the album many years ago, Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life, and he said, God is the only free psychiatrist known throughout the world, every boy and girl. And I think those who have a spiritual basis or any kind of deep personal growth know that self-examination is not something you should do once a week. It should be something that becomes a constant, an attitude. How did I play that? Did I do that well? Wow, should I have really sent that email? Wow. And at the end of the day, you know, the more you course correct as you go along, you see where you didn't do it right. Where do I need to atone? Where do I need to write that person an email and make an apology? Pick up the phone. So the more we live a conscious life, as you talk about, on any given day, we find we don't create as many major catastrophes and disasters in our lives because we're living more consciously as we move along. And if we don't, then those layers of unconsciousness accumulate, and then it becomes a crisis. I always say, many years ago, when I first started with the spiritual and the personal growth and so forth, I used to create these personal disasters in my life all the time, right? And then when I began to learn about spiritual principle, I would realize just attitudinally go to your knees. You know, God, I really get that I blew that. I am so sorry. I get it, and please forgive me. I want to make things right. Please restore this situation. And then a miracle would happen, because when that's your attitude, that you are contrite, you are remorseful, you get what you did, you take ownership and responsibility for your life, the universe does take you back on track. And then you go forward and everything's cool. And then a while later, I'd create another personal catastrophe, another disaster. And then I'd get down on my knees. Oh, I need a miracle. I'm so sorry. I wasn't very smart there, and I shouldn't have behaved that way. And then after a few times, I said to myself, Mary, next time you get down on your knees with that level of humility and willingness to get it right, why don't you just stay in that place? Why don't you just stop creating all these disasters that are clearly inevitable until you change your entire attitude about life? And I think that that's the ultimate goal, to get to the point where we don't have to live in constant and chronic patterns of crises, because we live a more conscious life consistently.
What about the things that you don't see, though? The shadow, those things that you're not aware of, that you're or not owning or not, and you're projecting it out in some way. So you're getting feedback from the universe that something's not right, but you don't know what it is.
I think the universe is intentional. The universe is intentional for the bud to become the blossom, the embryo becomes the baby, the acorn becomes the oak tree, and you and I are going to self-actualize. And if there's something we don't see, the universe has a way of making sure we will, because the consequences will become harsher and harsher. Now, if we're living a conscious life, we're open to our best friends telling us. Usually if you have your issues, your best friends know. They may or may not feel emotional permission to tell you, but life will show you. And, there's a line in the Course in Miracles: it is not up to you what you learn, it is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. Everything we need to know, the universe is constantly giving us feedback. It's whether or not we listen to it. Do you listen to the feedback? Do you think about what you were just shown? Or are you going to ignore it and just willfully forge ahead? If you do that, you will crash into some brick wall one way or another. The universe will have a way of showing you what you need to see.
So I think it was Carl Jung who said you must by necessity project that which is unresolved at the unconscious level out onto the external world. Yeah.
Yes, he said the darkness must be brought. Personal growth is like a detox. It has to come up in order to be released. So that ultimately karma, as it were, cause and effect, it's a gift, because it's the universe talking to you. That didn't come out of nowhere. The good thing that just happened in your life didn't come out of nowhere. And the bad thing that just happened in your life didn't come out of nowhere, for the most part.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you see, and if you want to make it well, the things that didn't go so well, the unconscious mind says, well, it was other people's fault.
Right.
The conscious mind says, what part did I play in this? And in the Course in Miracles, it says the price you pay for not taking 100% responsibility for your life is that you won't be able to change it.
You won't be able to change it.
Right, unless you take full responsibility.
Unless you take full responsibility.
Sometimes people will say to me, well, Marianne, 90% of what went wrong here was other people.
Right.
And I'll say, well, let's talk about the 10% that was yours. And I'm sure you see it with people, because it applies to money, it applies to career, it applies to everything. The conscious life is one in which we see ourselves as having generated the positive outcome or the negative outcome. And from a spiritual perspective, the aspect of self, which is the divine and the higher source created by whatever.
I want to talk to you more about that, but we do have to take a break, so we'll be right back.
Okay.
So we were talking about projection and what we create in our lives, and those things that we don't see. It seems to me that rather than waiting for the reflection of that which we don't want to appear, that you'd be far better off going to your friends, like you said, and saying, hey, what are those aspects of my personality that are either negative or destructive? Can you point those out to me? What do you think about that?
Well, the lens through which I view these things is spiritual. So the conversation that appeals to me is, dear God, by whatever name, God as you understand him, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, put my feet on the path of righteousness, righteousness. Put my feet on the path of love. Make me an instrument of peace today. Make me an instrument of love today. In every situation that I go into, may I be a positive element. May I bring an uplifted energy to the people that I meet, to the situations that I'm in. And if you do that, then you fly full wingspan in whatever situation. And you live with an open heart. And that is the path. That is the path that lifts you to the highest zone of creative possibility for your life. I think that there's a natural intelligence in the universe. An egg and a sperm come together. And then out of that emerge cells that form livers and brains and eyeballs and hearts and lungs. And I think that we are all cells in a greater organism of life. And we have a natural intelligence, just as every cell in the body does. And when that cell in the body forgets its natural intelligence, we call that cancer. It's a malignancy. And it goes off to do its own thing, and it's destructive to the whole organ and organism. The planet has a spiritual malignancy in that we, who are the individual cells, have forgotten that we are here to collaborate with other cells, to co-create with other cells in order to serve the healthy functioning of the whole. We've all gone off to do our own thing. It's the false teaching of the world that we're here just to do your thing. When we remember that we are here to be part of a collaborative venture in any situation, then there is no shadow in that moment because you are filled with light. That's what light is, it's understanding. Now, we all get into the situations where it's not as easy. Let's take this situation right now. I know that I'm supposed to be here to be fully present. I know that I'm here to just do my best, to co-create with you, to collaborate with you, that the universe is win-win, and that if I do that to the best of my ability, you win and I win. However, it's relatively easy because you're being kind to me. Everybody here
I'm
is
sorry.
nice
Do you want
to
me to shake it up?
No, this is important.
Yeah.
We all have a fairly easy time doing this
Right.
in situations where other people make it easy. But some of our greatest growth opportunities are where, let's say, you weren't. And that's where we are triggered. So we want to do in situations where the opportunity, we're fairly healed, step it up, do better. But we are all given opportunities in life, situations, they say another growth opportunity,
Yeah.
right? All of us find ourselves in situations where we are triggered. It's fairly easy to be your best around people who make it easy.
Yeah.
But life, we don't grow unless we are also brought into situations where, as you would say, the shadow comes up. What does that mean? It means that in that moment, usually because of some trigger based on some childhood wound, we simply, deep on some subconscious level, don't feel free to be our best, to be our most loving self, and get our needs met. And that's when we fall into our neurotic patterns. That's when we behave in unconscious ways.
I'm curious, can you, if you're open to it, sharing some challenge that you've had as of recent where you were really pushed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think most of us have them every day where we feel defensive or where we feel attacked. I know you mentioned earlier that I ran for Congress.
Right.
Well, boy, as I said to you, that's not a sissy's game.
Yeah.
What do you do when people lie about you? What do you do when people are unkind to you? What do you do when people undermine you? And life really isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to what happens to you. It's interesting because last night in my lecture here in Los Angeles, a woman started really giving me a hard time about the fact that I should be vegan. And all spiritual teachers should be vegan and so forth. And I've seen this over and over again at my lectures. The audience is looking to me, how are you going to respond to that? That's really the issue in life. It would be very easy to become defensive. It would be very easy to just like, I'm sorry my eating habits don't please you or
Right.
whatever. By the way, I am getting there.
You're getting there.
So I think that was a situation where just in the course of my life and in the congressional campaign, and I think anybody, and I'm sure you've had this as well,
Yeah.
anybody who has any kind of a public career has plenty of opportunity to deal with people who don't know you but have all kinds of opinions that aren't based on anything except the
I've had lots
simmer in their
of
own mind.
those. Yeah.
Right, so you come to know that really the growth opportunity here. In the Course in Miracles, it says, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. If you become defensive or attack back, that's the problem. The problem is not that person did that. That person doing that, in a way, they're sent from central casting in order for you to see the gap between your most perfect self and your temptation to not be your most perfect self. I mean, two people can go through the same situation, but to one person, they're completely triggered by it, and to another person, they're not triggered at all. Well, what's the difference? Usually childhood. the childhoods that they had. One person is totally triggered because it reminds them of mommy or it reminds them of daddy, and the other person just doesn't have that particular wound.
Now to keep it real here, because a lot of people would look at yourself or me, you far more. I'm the student here in this other, but they would look and they would expect perfection. But, it's like when you learn TM or Transcendental Meditation or something like that, it's a practice. And I don't know that anybody ever gets it perfect. Do you find that it's a constant practice where you're constantly having to guide yourself to a higher level of responsiveness?
Well, first of all, I think it is playing my audience small and almost disrespecting to think that they're so unsophisticated as to think that you or I are perfect. It's kind of like when you go to therapy. And the therapist has, there are ethical rules, there are even legal rules. So if I go to therapy, the therapist will not be coming to my birthday party. I will not be going to theirs. They will not have lunch with me. They will not be giving me a gift for my birthday. Why? Because within that really sacred, protected space of therapy, I do have a right to expect them not to be perfect, but to certainly try their best.
Right.
Now, outside that, I assume they have a personal life. I assume that they have their own issues in life. But the rules, ethically and legally, are such that I won't be privy to that. Now, they have to be working on themselves, or they couldn't be such a good therapist. Right. So what I find, and I think sophisticated people in your audience as well, assume you have a life. You're going through your own issues, as am I. But I think what people have a right to expect is that you're trying. That's what they have a right to expect. If you want perfect, look to the great religious and spiritual masters. And I do believe that they have existed on the planet and perhaps exist now. I'm not one. I've never claimed to be one. But I think that my audience has a right to expect from me, from you, et cetera, that we make a decent try. And I think that reads. More than a decent try.
But people will always project the woman in your audience wanting you to be
stop transference.
vegan.
That's very correct. You can't stop transference, whether with a therapist or with a leader such as ourselves. But I think a more sophisticated audience sees it as it is. But I think that people smell. It's invisible. It's in the air. People, at least in my experience. And also, I've had the experience, perhaps you as well, if I make a mistake on stage, as long as I'll say, that actually was not correct, what I just said. Let me go back, because I don't think it was what I just said. I need to go back a little. That's all they want to hear. They want to hear that you
take responsibility,
and you try. And I find audiences both can discern when you're off and are also very forgiving, profoundly so, when they see humility and a willingness to take ownership and apologize. That's been my experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it was Barbara Streisand that said in the beginning they all want to build you up and then they all want to tear you down.
I didn't go through that much of the building up phase early in my career. They went right to the tearing down. But I do think it's true that, there's that old saying, don't take any of it too seriously, because it's one of those changeable things.
Now, I'm curious about your views of spirituality, because I mean, you're interchangeable with the words God, with the word universe, with any word that we would conceive of a higher power to be.
Right.
What are your beliefs around that?
Well, I'm rather traditional.
Yeah.
I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. I am a Jew, so I don't have a problem with the traditional God language. Some people do. These are words. I don't feel God has an ego. So in my lectures on Monday nights, I am out there with the language, the God language. But if I am speaking to a corporate crowd, or, for instance, in my political campaign, in America, we have a tradition of secular conversation within the political realm. That's important that we do, because we are a religiously pluralistic society, people of all religions and no religions. So within my political campaign, I would talk about humanitarian values, I would talk about compassion, I would talk about conscience, but I certainly wouldn't break out in a prayer.
Right.
So I had respect for the context.
That's interesting, because I was reading, I'm not a fan of Bill Maher, but I was reading an article that he had written about religion, and he said that he thought that religion was doing a disservice in many ways because It wasn't really looking at the case that he was making was that our morals come from the religion that we practice. And he said, well, that's not really true. He said, religions have been saying that forever, but our morals come from being more well-educated, from being more, and it was an interesting case that he made. I wish I had the article here with me. Like I said, not a big fan of, I think he goes a little bit too off course on some things. But, when you think of religion versus spirituality, where do you find that you most sit? Do you practice Kabbalah at all, or?
No. Well, I'm certainly aware of the Kabbalah, but I don't have an in-depth practice of the principles of the Kabbalah. I believe that there's one truth with a capital T, and it is written in many different ways. And I think there are universal themes at the heart of all the great religious teachings of the world. I remember when I was growing up, my mother's best friend was a very traditional Christian conservative. And every time somebody did something wonderful, she'd say, oh, she's such a good Christian, or he's such a good Christian. I remember my mother saying to her one day, BJ, what do you think a good Jew is? Because every time somebody did something wonderful, you say they're a good Christian. Well, that's also they were a good Jew in that moment. And I think that's why I love the Course in Miracles. It is not a religion. It is a psychological training in relinquishing a thought system based on fear and accepting instead a thought system based on love. And the values there are the universal spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual teachings of the world.
See, and I look at that and I think it's beautiful. I wonder if you see right now as you travel the world, you teach, you've written 10 best-selling books, you teach every Monday night, and we'll talk about that here in Los Angeles, which is really cool. And you do it you won't turn away people that don't have money, which is
it's just a donation basis.
$15, nothing. And you let anybody in, basically, that wants the information. Do you see and do you believe that there's a wave that's sweeping around the planet of people moving from religion over to more spiritual principles?
Well,
or no? Obviously,
we see both.
Yeah.
What you see with religion and what you see in every other aspect of life is an intensification of some serious darkness and shadow, as you would say. But you also see this simultaneously, this phenomenon by which a greater light and expansiveness and enlightenment and spirituality is emerging on the planet. We're living in a critical moment and a very dramatic moment in that sense. Obviously, you see people in the name of God speaking hate, and that some religions have nothing to do with God in that sense. And you see people who are speaking in secular contexts, speaking from a greater love and compassion. And that's what matters, not the belief, but the experience. And I think that that's not what matters, not only on the earth. I personally think that's what matters to God.
But then when you look at fundamentalism on any level, whether you're looking at Christian fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism.
Or as in the case of Bill Maher, atheistic fundamentalism.
Or atheistic.
Because you were talking about being his fan. Politically, I really am actually his
really?
fan.
I think he goes off sometimes.
I think politically he's pretty brilliant a lot of the times. But his stuff on I heard him say the other day something about how there are crazies in every religion. And if I'd been on this show, I would have said, yeah, there are crazy atheists too. I mean, fundamentalism is a psychosis. It has nothing to do with, all religious.
It's all isolation.
Yeah, and so, you find whether it's religious people or atheists, the view, I am right, you are wrong. That's a human darkness. The idea that I am right, you are wrong, period, absolute. That's fundamentalism, and obviously it's not a gift to the world.
We're going to come right back because we got to take another break. All right. So, when we were off camera, we were just talking a little bit about spirituality and the world and the intersection of politics. Knowing that here you were, you just ran for Congress, and you came in fourth, is that?
Yes, well, it's an open primary in California, so the top two then go into the primary.
Okay. And so how, can you share with me a little bit about the intersection of spirituality with politics? Because I'm not really sure what you mean either.
I wrote a book in 1998 called Healing the Soul of America. And I was and remain fascinated by Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Two who were arguably the brightest political lights of the 20th century, whose work was based on spiritual principle. This principle was articulated as the philosophy of nonviolence by Mahatma Gandhi. King traveled to India, and he brought back that philosophy for its application to the struggle for civil rights in the United States in the 1960s.
Was it King that said, Jesus gave me the message, Gandhi gave me the method? Was that King that said that?
I have not heard that particular line, but it sounds like something he would say. And the philosophy of nonviolence is the idea that just as love and the principles of love and the dictates of love heal our personal relationships, they heal our political and social relationships as well. That we can see love as a collective force, and that's what Martin Luther King said of Gandhi, that he had turned love, the ethic of love, into a broad-scale social force for good. So when we have political conversations, and our country is a perfect example, we rarely discuss the role of compassion, the role of love, the role of conscience. But this is not only what Gandhi did, this is not only what King did. They were successful politically with that philosophy. This is not gooey love. This is not weak stuff. This is not fuzzy brain stuff. This was the force that allowed the Indian independence movement to bloodlessly rid themselves of the colonial British Empire. And this was the force which fueled the success of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So I think that the philosophy of nonviolence and seeing the role of love in politics and spirituality is today, as much as ever, very, very relevant. And in my own congressional campaign, my having run for Congress confirmed my belief that people are yearning for a more meaningful relationship to the public sphere. You know, we read books about inspiration, we go to therapy, we go to support groups. You know, the in-depth wisdom conversation, what you do, trying to find a deeper conversation, like you said, let's have an in-depth conversation. People want that in America today. People understand we need to have an in-depth conversation in our romances, in our marriages, with our lovers, with our children, with our friends. But politics remains this area where the conversation is so cheap and so shallow. It is killing us that this is true. Because what emerges from a shallow conversation is very unwise behavior. And the behavior of our government tends to be both domestically and internationally, because it is so lacking in conscience, because it is so lacking in in-depth ethics. You don't have the kind of income inequality we have if you have any heart at all. You know, someone who doesn't have conscience is called a sociopath. And at this point, we have a sociopathic economic system. So whether you're talking about domestic or international affairs, we have, for an African-American man living in the United States today, has a 1 in 3 lifetime chance of incarceration. We have the largest rate of incarceration of any nation in the world. During the 1970s, we had 300,000 people incarcerated. We now have 2.4 million. You're so outside any ethical conversation when you're not even taking a deep look at what's going on here. So I think people are ready. And my congressional campaign only confirmed this belief. I think Americans are not the problem. It's the American government too often that is the problem. Not in a sense of government is bad. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those people. I mean in the sense that the conversation that is hip, happening, enlightened, and conscious, that you live within in your career, I live within in my career, it's happening in America. You know, Martin Luther King once said that the American people are far more compassionate than the U.S. government. So I, being a fan of Gandhi, being a fan of King, and like I said, this is only more confirmed for me, having run for Congress. People want to have a more meaningful political conversation, a more meaningful politics. I'm old enough, I remember, I was a child, but I remember Martin Luther King. I remember Bobby Kennedy. I lived, even though a child, I saw people alive in our society who spoke meaning and values and depth within the political sector. So
how do you, like, when you think of the problems that are out there, what do you see as some of the solutions to that?
Well, we have a cancer underlying all the cancers, and that is the fact that money and politics has turned our system into a legalized system of bribery and corruption. Until we deal with the issue of money and politics, then we will continue. We are de-democratizing this country. Our democracy itself is so frayed. When you see some of the horrible policies that do not even reflect the will of the American people, but reflect the fact that moneyed interests now, we have, over the last few decades, through tax policies, trade policies, banking policies, and so forth, taken the resources of this country and just systematically moved them into the hands of a very few people. This is not democracy.
How's that going to change, though? 'Cause
We have to overturn Citizens United, and we have to pass a constitutional amendment to have publicly financed campaigns.
Publicly financed campaigns.
I think we need publicly financed campaigns.
Right.
So that money isn't even the issue. There might be somebody in this room, some college professor somewhere who knows infinitely more, has infinitely more wisdom about what should happen.
Right.
And yet wouldn't even dream in a million years, because I think, well, how could I ever play that game? How would I ever raise that kind of money? And that's why when I ran for the House of Representatives. And the way the founders set things up, they thought the House of Representatives, this is why it's only a two-year term. They thought the candle maker would be in for a couple years, the farmer would be in for a couple years, the shopkeeper would be in for a couple years, the baker would be in for a couple years. And that's how the House of Representatives is supposed to work. Faith would be in for a couple years, you would be in for a couple years, you would be in for a couple years. It's supposed to be the people's house. And of course, that's not what we have. And that's why we need to redemocratize.
Wow. And that sounds like a big effort. It doesn't sound like a simple thing.
Well, no, but what major social change is a small effort?
Right.
We're talking about the fraying of American democracy and the repair of American democracy. It's not a small effort.
Who's going to be the architect of that, though?
I think that this conversation is welling up in people. I think that you saw it some with the Occupy movement. You see it with a lot of people talking on the left and the right of these very, very serious problems. I know in my own life, I didn't win my race, but I never thought that one woman's congressional campaign, even if I had won, was going to fix everything. And I didn't think, nor do I think, that my not having won that campaign was going to stop this revolution of consciousness. So I think that it is a conversation emerging from the bottom of things. I think it's all over the country. And I think when people like yourself, those of us who are in a transformational world, recognize the importance of the kind of principles we talk about and bring them into that domain, I think that has the potential to create critical mass more than any other element.
So now when you look at that, do you think, I mean, because we go back to the question I asked you before about religion versus spirituality, and I believe, and tell me if I misquote you, but what I was hearing was that religion can oftentimes be very isolationist, where it's like one's right, one's wrong, my way or the highway,
Well, not every religion thinks it has a monopoly on truth. However, religion, organized religion, tends to be about doctrine and dogma and external institutions. The spiritual path is conviction of the heart. It is the path of love. It does not necessarily emerge from adherence to a particular doctrine or dogma, but adherence to conscience, adherence to wisdom of the heart, to the dictates of compassion and love and forgiveness. And whether you contextualize that within a religious container or contextualize it within secular, humanitarian, personal growth, doesn't matter. What matters is the experience that we take very seriously, that we are on the earth to love one another. Here in the United States, we have the second highest child poverty rate of all advanced nations in the world. How can a country like ours have the second highest child poverty rate of all the advanced nations of the world? You can speak about it religiously, like this fantastic new pope does. Right. I just love him. Or you can speak about it in just humanitarian terms. This is wrong. This is wrong.
I get you. So it's like, as things are changing now, we're looking, everybody's looking at the world in a new way. We see that there's this uprising. The only question is, how long is it going to take to really make the impact?
You have an excellent point. And not only how long is it going to take, but how much human suffering needs to occur. That is what is left to us. I do believe, as Martin Luther King said, love will have the final say. And human history bears this out. No great evil, such as a Hitler, has ever ultimately won the war or won the effort. The issue, even environmentally, people say, well, don't worry about the environment because worst comes to worst, the Earth will just have to kick off human beings for 250,000 years.
We'll go to the moon, we'll go to Mars.
Well, I don't know if we will,
Yeah,
and
I know.
think I'll be able to do that. And I
Right.
think tremendous, immeasurable amounts of human suffering would occur first. So I think that that's what we need to remember. The issue is not whether or not things will be okay, but how much human suffering will have to occur in order for that change to happen, and that lies in our hands. And we, as men, as women, decide whether we are going to turn around this ship that is headed for the iceberg. That iceberg could be biochemical disaster, it could be environmental
Nuclear,
catastrophe.
environmental, yeah.
The issue for our generation is whether or not we're going to turn the ship around and turn it around now, because we don't have much time left.
Now, how do you do that when you've got those that would isolate themselves and claim that they have the one truth, the right truth, the only truth? How do you, and there's I don't know what percentage of society would fall into that category. Maybe what in the United States, maybe 50% even, don't you think, or more?
Well, 50% certainly does not matter. Society does not change because the majority wakes up one day. The majority didn't wake up and say, let's free the slaves, shall we? The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. Why don't we just do that? Society does not change because the majority gets it. By definition, the status quo is fine with what was and then what has been. The society changes when enough people, the critical mass, that trim tab, a small group of people. And that's how evolution operates. We learned that in school. When a species is moving in a direction where its behavior is maladaptive for survival, a mutation occurs. That mutation does not represent the majority, but it's the more survivable option. The species goes extinct or it moves in a new direction. Not the United States, the human race right now is behaving in a way that is maladaptive for our survival. We are systematically destroying our own habitat, the planet Earth, and we fight too much. And we fight too much with increasingly dangerous weapons of mass destruction. So at this point, the issue is, are there enough of us? And I believe that there are. It's not like the majority were abolitionists or the majority were women suffragettes. But when the social axis of change is not horizontal, it's vertical. It's not about watering down your message, making it shallower and shallower to get more people to join in. It's about going deeper and deeper with the message that you have. And then it becomes a resonant field, because all minds are joined. All this is happening on a subconscious level. Just make it deep. Don't even concern yourself with how many people hear you. Go deep. And it becomes a force multiplier. Conviction itself is a force multiplier. Love is a force multiplier. And we're living at a moment right as we speak where I think that process is unfolding, and it's a race for time.
You're going to orchestrate those tipping points, as Michael.
And then you move into that
Gladwell
quantum
spoke about.
field,
Yeah.
which is beyond time. And
We got to take a break. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, in this last segment that we have, about some of the things that you have. Actually, just before that, I got one more question for you. What do you see as the future of religion, spirituality? Do you think that there's, as you project out 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future, what changes do you see?
Well, I think there is a spiritual revival going on the planet. I don't think that it is relegated or unique to any particular area of the world or ethnicity or even religion. I think just as every cell is assigned, one cell is assigned to the blood, one cell is assigned to the heart, one cell is assigned to the bones, one cell is assigned to the lungs. I think we are all assigned. Some of us are assigned to the arts, some of us are assigned to education, some of us are assigned to business. And I believe that some people are assigned, their natural propensity is to work within the religious structures. Some are to work outside the religious structures. Looking at this Pope, I think we were talking about the Pope before. I mean, obviously his assignment is within a particular organized religious structure, but he's speaking enlightenment.
Well, they had to move things forward.
There's
I think,
enlightenment happening inside religious structures, and there's enlightenment happening outside.
Right. When you look at all the things that went on in Catholicism, you could look at that as being the shadow of Catholicism.
I think that's pretty dark stuff. Absolutely.
So now they're moving things forward.
He is a burst of light.
we got to do some things
this
differently.
Pope is
So
a
we're
burst
seeing
of
it.
light.
Yeah. So now I'm looking at a bunch of books here that you've written 10. There were 4 that were bestsellers. There were 6 bestsellers, right? And
6 bestsellers and 4 number one, right?
New York Times. Which were your number one?
Okay, Return to Love, which is, I always say, it's the Cliff Notes of A Course in Miracles. That was my first book.
That was your first book.
Was my first
And this is
book.
the famous one that had the quote that's always misquoted. And
Right, the misattribution to Nelson Mandela.
Do you know it by heart?
I think I do. You know, the interesting thing about that quote, it's simply a paragraph from the personal growth, personal power section of that book. I have no idea how it got separated out and then misattributed to
Nelson
President Mandela,
Yeah.
as honored as I would be had he quoted it.
Right.
He simply did not. I think it goes, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. I think it says, who am I? We ask, who am I to be power? See, some people have it memorized better than I do. Who am I to be talented, gorgeous, fabulous? You know, whenever people argue with me and President Mandela, and I say, well, would a man who had been in prison in Africa for 25 years then say, who am I to be fabulous, gorgeous, talented, brilliant? I mean, come on, this is such a girl speaking. Anybody can tell this is a girl
Don't
speaking.
hate me because I'm beautiful.
Who am I to be gorgeous or brilliant or fabulous? I don't see him saying, who am I to be fabulous?
I'm so fabulous.
This is my book
Some men
about
would,
spirit.
but
So
different
to
part of
me,
town.
spiritual
Okay.
principle is about universal principles applied to every area. Healing the Soul of America is about politics. The Age of Miracles is about that midlife crisis you were talking about. The Law of Divine Compensation is about work and money. The Enchanted Love is about our intimate relationships, our romances, and so forth. Illuminata is about prayer. A Year of Miracles is about daily inspiration. I pretty much just write about whatever is in my heart that I feel moved by right now. The book I'm finishing right now is about suffering and sadness. And
Do you enjoy the process of writing?
I think my answer is what I think any writer's answer would be. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's exhilarating, but it's hard. Kind of like a political campaign.
Or having a
Very
baby.
exhilarating and brutal at the same time.
Yeah, I wrote my first book. I said, I'm never going to do that again.
Right.
And then I found myself doing another one 5 years later. And then I said, now I'm never going to do that again.
So
But
you've written 2 books?
I've written 2 books, yeah.
Wow, what are they called?
The first one was I think I kind of sold out. I'm going to be brutally honest. Like I was going with the one theme, and then I thought, well, what's the market want? And I changed the titles to
Oh, no. That book will tell
you.
you never think that way.
I know, and you know what? I wrote the second book, and the second book was titled "The New Entrepreneurial Mind" at first, and it was about social entrepreneurialism.
That's a good title.
But I called Mark Victor Hansen. I said, Mark, I said, listen, I've got this problem with my book, and I said, I don't know about the title, and he says, no, the title sucks. That's why you called me. What is it?
The New Entrepreneurial Mind?
Yeah,
I think it's a great title.
I thought it was. Well, thank you. So,
But then he's sold a lot more books than I have.
Yeah,
so.
I might want to go into rewrites with these, but so it ended up becoming Instant Wealth, Wake Up Rich, with wealth meaning physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, everything. But I may end up doing a rewrite of both or collapsing them. I'm not sure how I do it, but so you've got all these books that you've written on multiple topics, but they're all coming from the same place.
Yes,
from the core principles.
That's correct.
I also I was surprised to see this because I went on your website before you came in, and so you're doing these Monday night talks in Los Angeles.
I
What's that
speak
all
every
about?
Monday night in Los Angeles at the Saban Theater in Beverly Hills, but I also live stream it, and all that's only just donation basis, and people can find out about that at Marianne.com.
And so people can watch that anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world, and that's what's so really fascinating. You're involved in this global conversation. It's pretty profound what technology can do for us.
What are the topics?
Last night I talked about Martin Luther King, obviously,
Yeah.
given that it was his national holiday.
Yeah.
One night I might talk about forgiveness, another night about relationships, another night about work and money, another night about health.
I think that's pretty amazing because you don't see anybody that's got the same. I want to say stature, but that's not the right word. You've been in the field for so long. Your
I've been
wealth
around
of
for a while.
information. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not aging
No, I
you.
have.
But you've been. I mean, you own the space of this, and here you're doing it for $15, and you're doing it for people.
Well, now it's just donation basis.
And it's just donations, so you
Yeah.
won't turn away people if they don't have
No.
money. And it's like, I asked you before how the live streaming is work because this is kind of the new thing. You know, Rama, who works with us, does the live streaming for Oneness University. And how are you finding that works?
It's so exciting. It's just so exciting. I'm delighted by what technology, I think the internet and technology and all of that is once again, it's used either by fear or love. It's used by ego or spirit. We all know that there's some real destructive potential there. But the constructive potential, building relationships, spreading communication is so profound, and I feel so privileged.
That's
and
amazing.
blessed.
What percentage would you say of your listeners or the people that would watch via the live stream versus coming
Far
to the
more
live
on
event?
live stream.
Far more.
Far more on live stream. You'll have a few hundred in the room and a few thousand
Wow.
on live stream.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So you're able to, you can have Marianne Williamson in your living room. That's
Yeah, but there's something, if you do live in Los Angeles, there's
Yeah.
something about, I believe,
The
that
magic
people
of
feel
coming.
being in the room and with other people. You can't
you can't replace that.
that's-
That's that
can't
high
replace that.
touch. You
Yeah.
know, with the more high tech we get, the
Absolutely.
more high touch
and
we
being
need.
in the room with people who are meditating and praying together, it's beautiful.
Pretty amazing. And now, when you look at, did you see the movie? God, what was that? Total Recall, the original one with
I don't
Arnold
think I
Schwarzenegger.
ever saw Total Recall.
Yeah, they had a holographic teacher that showed up in the living room teaching tennis lessons and
Really?
stuff. And it seems to me that that's kind of the wave of the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already starting to happen. If they live stream, right now it's on the screen, but in
Next
a few
it'll be-
years, our grandkids anyway, it'll be a hologram.
Hologram.
I mean, what's the difference? Beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam me up.
We were going to do, at one point, we were going to do a PBS special with, it was myself, it was Mark Victor Hansen, Dr. Reverend Michael Beckwith, and Bob Proctor. Uh-huh. And they brought us together, and
It doesn't occur to you need at least one girl in there?
well, it should have been. Actually, your name did
Who
come up.
even does that?
Your
Huh?
name did come up when we were in there talking.
Didn't go too far.
No, well, none of it went too far. But Michael ended up doing it himself. But he's a good friend. I love the Rev. But so we were there, and Mark, Mark's this big thinker. Always, his mind's all over the place. He's like, yeah, we can project in holographic images of Buddha and all the great teachers from all time, and they can come on and teach in this thing. I was like, oh my God. I think we got too big in our thinking, and the project just kind of died. But
Yeah.
but I think there is a time for that. That's where
Absolutely.
it's headed. Yeah, it's very interesting. So now you've also got this other seminar that you've got coming up. This is Invoking Romantic Mysteries.
I'm
What's that all
very
about?
excited about this one. Every 2 or 3 years, I do a relationship seminar. And taking these spiritual principles and applying them to this area of life, I think is very significant, because I think it's an area where obviously when your love life works, when your intimate relationships work, it's one of the most beneficial aspects of our lives. It's very healing. It's very happiness producing. But when that area does not work, I think we all know that there can be great pain that emerges. And the ego mind and the spiritual mind have very different outlooks when it comes to romantic love and building relationships, not only attracting them, but knowing how to live within them. We live in a society where everything is moving so fast. We're always under the barrage, the assault of modernity. And the space for love shrinks ever more every day. Everybody's under economic stress. Everybody's under career success. There's so much going on in your 24-hour news cycle. And we find ourselves giving less and less time to that sacred space. Not only prayer, meditation, but love of the people that are in our lives. And so we see even people who are married, who have partners, whose relationships are just frayed because these essentials that are necessary on a daily basis are being too often ignored. So what is the role of forgiveness? Where is the vulnerability versus boundary issue? What are the masculine, feminine issues? What are the issues of real changes of having to do with making space for love in our lives? What are the behavioral issues? Sometimes we find ourselves with our most intimate partner saying things and doing things that we wouldn't do to someone we hardly even knew. We would be kinder.
Right.
We would be more courteous.
Or someone we didn't even like.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So this is a weekend. It starts February 13th through 15th, Friday night, all day Saturday till 1 o'clock on Sunday. Also live streamed, as well as here in Los Angeles at the Marina del Rey Marriott, where we go deep into that particular context of relationships, particularly intimate relationships, and what are the spiritual principles, what needs to be, talk about course correction. Where do we need to clear up what happened in the past? Where do we need to see ourselves and our partners and our prospective partners in a wholly different way, or through a real different emotional lens, so we stand within a different emotional place within ourselves, because mentally we have a different filter. And I always look forward to this one because I think it's the sweetest of all the seminars, and it's fun and it's sweet, and it's for couples. It's good for couples, but it's also good for single people, because some of the best work you do on relationships is when you're not in them. But sometimes couples, the whole relationship needs a course correction. So it's for both.
Now, how about you? Are you in a relationship right now, or what's your love situation?
I have a life. Oh, that's always the answer. I have a life.
That's the answer. And you have a daughter as well, yeah?
I do.
How old is your
I
daughter?
have a fantastic 24-year-old daughter.
Oh, beautiful. Is she in the same path that you are?
I tell you, she's she's a historian. She's getting her master's in history and wants to be a history professor, early modern European history. But she has recently taken over sort of as head of operations for my office.
Oh, wow.
And is doing such an extraordinary job.
Did you have to cajole her into that, or was that something?
I think she saw Mommy needed help, and she said, I'm coming home. She lives in London. She'll go back, but we'll talk to her a lot by Skype. She's my best friend, I'm blessed to say.
What's her? It's in
India.
India. That's beautiful. That's
Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah. Now, in terms of, I'm curious, because you and I were talking about travel before,
Yes.
and we've traveled all over the world in different seminars and stuff.
Right.
And you say you're looking to go back out to Australia, or to?
I think I might be going to Australia in the summer. I'm going to be in Canada, quite a few places in Canada in May. And,
Do you enjoy it still, or?
Well, as you and I
Yeah.
were talking, you get to the point where you're, it's no longer exciting and glamorous, that's for sure, to be heading to the airport one more day. But when I'm there, I absolutely love it. And I lecture in Europe as well. So people can find out all of that on Marianne.com and get on my email list, and I'll let you know.
Perfect. And I love these Monday night lectures. I think that's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we got to wrap here, but I really totally appreciate you coming in. And
Thank you. I appreciate your having me, and I wish you the very best in the work that you do. And
Thank you.
I think removing the blocks to people's receptivity to abundance in their careers is at the deepest level, it's holy work. So God bless you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
All right.